Hi, my name's Dr. Campbell Murdoch. I'm a GP with a special interest in metabolic health. This session is an information session on metabolic health and its many benefits. It is not for medical advice. So we're going to cover why metabolic health matters, what it is, how to measure it, how to fix it, and we're also going to talk through the 28-day rapid results plan. And just to reiterate, this is for information only. It is not personalised medical advice for which you must seek attention from your own healthcare professional. So why as a GP did I get interested in metabolic health in the first place? Well, this is not an unusual, what we call patient presentation. Why has the person come to see the doctor? I'm struggling in the morning with my back pain, I need a knee op and I just don't feel well. Now I might look at this person's notes and see that they are 52 years old. They have acid reflux on a tablet for that. They have high blood pressure on a tablet, pre-diabetes, depression on a tablet, irritable bowel syndrome, OA or osteoarthritis, arthritis of aging of their knee and they think they need a knee operation now, back pain on some simple painkillers. They want to lose weight but they can't because the back and knee are too painful, so they feel they can't exercise to lose weight, and they feel tired all the time. Couple of reflections on this patient. One is they want to be well. You can't end up on that many medications, that many tablets, without visiting a healthcare professional. Two, I don't think this is success. This person wants to be well, they're attending a medical care, but they're still sick with increasing numbers of tablets and still feeling unwell. I don't think this can be seen as success in our modern healthcare system. And the problem is, and this is a lot what drove me to get interested in this, is that we have this problem, like the previous patient we just met on a massive global scale. There is a global health crisis going on in this space. In the UK, something like 70% of adults are metabolically unhealthy. In the US, only 8% of adults are fully metabolically healthy. So this is a significant problem, and certainly in my day job as a GP, it takes up a vast amount. Possibly the majority of people I see have poor metabolic health as one of the major root causes for them seeking help. Some of the conditions linked to or associated with poor metabolic health include these, and there are many more, but prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure or hypertension, fatty liver, so excess fat being laid down in the liver, which affects between 1/4 of adults, heart disease, stroke, dementia, many musculoskeletal conditions, so conditions that are like arthritis or tendon problems, Parkinson's disease is associated, chronic kidney disease, so slow failure of the kidneys over a number of years is associated, skin conditions such as psoriasis, some cancers, certainly not all cancers, but some cancers are linked with poor metabolic health, sleep apnea, where people stop breathing properly when they fall asleep, conditions such as polycystic ovary syndrome, which affects between 1 in 20 and 1 in 5 women, and is often quite neglected from the perspective that we're going to be talking about. Very interestingly, and coming out in recent research, is most mental health disorders may well be linked or associated with poor metabolic health, and possibly due to how the brain cells are metabolizing and using energy. And there are many, many more conditions. And perhaps best summed up as a journalist once quoted to me when we were talking about this, these are diseases that shouldn't exist. So diseases that would have been rare or virtually non-existent 100 years ago, but are now very common. Now, you might ask yourself if you might have a metabolic health problem. If you answer yes to any of these, then chances are you could probably do with improving your metabolic health. So do you feel tired all the time, have energy dips through the day, feel fed up with a low mood, have general aches and pains, struggling to lose weight, have a waist circumference more than half your height, so belly fat is very strongly linked to poor metabolic health, raised blood pressure, skin tags, so knobbly bits of skin that you might find on your neck or armpits or groin, or also people can also get increased pigmentation in the groin and armpits and neck with poor metabolic health. Frequent infections or more severe infections when you get one, not fighting them off as quickly. and certainly any of those conditions on the previous page. So if you're ticking yes to any of those, certainly 2 or more of those, then I'd suggest you may well see benefits from improving your metabolic health. I just want to highlight the picture on the right there is showing a scan of somebody, and that red stuff you can see is the fat inside the belly, whereas the blue stuff you can see is the fat under the skin. So fat inside the belly, the red stuff is very harmful to the body. It is very closely associated with poor metabolic health. Whereas fat under the skin, the blue stuff, as you can see, this is less harmful to the body. It's less harmful than fat that sits inside the belly. Now, the reason for showing this is just to highlight this is not all about being overweight or obesity. Although we often link overweight and obesity to poor metabolic health, actually, I think it's not the best way to view things. Viewing weight or obesity as the problem, I don't think is an ideal perspective. And the reason for that is this person in this scan here would likely be of what would be considered a healthy weight, but they're extremely metabolically sick. And vice versa, some people are very good at putting lots of fat on under the skin, which protects them with following the same unhealthy behaviors of putting fat on around inside the belly. So although for some people weight might be their interest in their goal, or losing belly fat or total body fat might be their interest with metabolic health, which you can certainly help hugely with, often very quickly, we need to be careful not to pick on weight as the core focus of what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve a totally more healthy person overall. What's possible with metabolic health? These are some quotes. My mood and confidence have gone through the roof. My weight has remained stable for over a year. My skin has improved and is looking so much healthier. It's such an easy way of life, and I'll never go back to my old ways. I now have a very noticeable waist and it feels great. This person lost about 15 centimeters off their waist within 28 days. My God, it has made such a difference because I can function now. To go from feeling so sluggish to how I feel now, the difference is amazing. So you can see as a GP, much of my working life is spent often focuses on disease. But actually, the lovely thing with metabolic health is even if we start with a focus on what's going wrong, we can very quickly get to a focus on what can be achieved and actually people's health significantly improving very, very rapidly often. So what is metabolic health? As far as I'm aware, there is no dictionary definition yet of metabolic health. So I came up with a top statement there, that the body is able to store, release and use fuel whilst maintaining stability and thriving. Basically what this means is the body can take in food, that food is digested, it then can be put into storage very easily and happily. And then when needed, the body can release that fuel from storage into the blood to supply the body with the fuel it needs, and then use or burn that fuel quite happily. All the while the body's doing this, it's keeping the whole body in nice stability, and when the body wants to, it can completely thrive. When you want to press the accelerator and go, you can. So that's my definition. Perhaps an easier way of looking at it is the foundation of physical and mental health. So if your metabolic health is not as good as it could be, you might not expect your physical and mental health to be optimal, and vice versa. And this is what I see with many of my patients. When the physical or mental health is not as good as they would like it to be, and there are signs that metabolic health can be improved, we'll often take a focus of let's improve your metabolic health and let's see what happens to these other conditions you're struggling with. And often very quickly they see many benefits. Perhaps put most simply, this is the best metaphor I've come up with for metabolic health. It is the engine for life. So metabolic health can be viewed as a continuum really, and this diagram here of the cars helps to explain that. So the car on the left may be considered poor metabolic health. So it doesn't look like it might want to start. When it does start, it might chug away a bit. When you head off, you might be heading onto the motorway and it's hitting 50 miles an hour, 51 miles an hour as it heads down that motorway slip road, struggling to get the speed up to beat that lorry that's coming on the inside lane. Once you're on the motorway, the car's chugging away, you're wondering if it's going to break down any minute, you're feeling extremely anxious and nervous about what's going to happen next. And then when it does break down, you manage to get over onto the hard shoulder and you lift the bonnet and you just don't know where to start. So that is a metaphor of poor metabolic health. Versus the car on the right there is going to want to start. When it does start, the engine's going to want to go. You're heading down that slip road onto the motorway, and you can see that lorry coming. You can just touch the accelerator and happily get up to 70 miles an hour and onto the motorway. As you're traveling along, you're enjoying the journey. You're thinking about where you're going, or listening to your favorite podcast, or just daydreaming. You're not worried about the car's going to break down any minute. But if it does break down, you can pull over, and then you lift the bonnet and you can find the single broken part, get it fixed and move on your way. So that car is considered in good metabolic health. And as it is showing here, these are a continuum. And what's extremely important with metabolic health is these three factors. It affects us all, it's measurable, and it can always be improved. And that last statement's really key. No matter what you did this morning, yesterday, what else has happened in life, your metabolic health can always be improved. And people sometimes say, well, how much can I expect to improve it? And the response to that is, if you kind of graded that broken down looking car as a 1 out of 10 and the car at the right hand side is a 10 out of 10, it's quite acceptable to expect your metabolic health to increase from, say, a 4 to an 8 if you were scoring yourself subjectively. What's also really important, as I've written there, is metabolic health is measurable. I'm very keen when we focus on certainly lifestyle topics that we are able to measure the impact of what we're doing. Nobody wants to put a lot of effort in to improve their health, only to find out in 20 years' time that it didn't make a blind bit of difference and they didn't end up as healthy as they could have done. So with metabolic health, we've got things we can relatively easily measure, and within a matter of days or weeks, you know if it's working for you or not. So I'm just going to cover some very basic human anatomy and physiology now, a very simple level, but just to make sure that you can get to grips with the basics of metabolic health, which will help empower you to make the choices that are right for you. So starting with what we all know, we are human, and we live on Earth, and we eat, we move, we sleep, we think, and here we are today alive. And if you zoom in on us, you would find organs. So organs are effectively like the parts of a car, the specialist parts of a car. You've got the brain, you've got lungs, you've got heart, you've got the liver, stomach, pancreas, intestines, muscles, etc. So all of these specialist parts of the body work together to keep the entire body alive, living, just like parts of a car. All the parts of a car are needed to keep a car functioning and driving. Then you zoom in on the organs and you come to cells, and we think there are about 37 trillion cells in the human body. And I like to think of cells as each is its own little being. It wants to look after itself. It might have some specialist jobs to do, and if it's in a good place, it will be able to do those specialist jobs and look after itself and the rest of the body. Versus if it's in a bad place, and if it's not looked after very well, if it's struggling on the inside, it's going to be just interested in doing its best to look after itself, and it's not going to care what happens to every other cell or the rest of the body around it. Within cells, we have what's called metabolism, and this is basically all the chemical reactions needed for life. So chemicals being built up, broken down, being turned from one chemical into another chemical, and energy being extracted. So just reflect for a minute, there was you that woke up this morning, you've got 37 trillion cells in your body, and then you've got all of these chemical reactions going on inside those cells. It's an astonishing level of activity going on inside you at this very second. Within cells, there are these things called mitochondria, and they are often nicknamed the kind of powerhouses of cells. One of their key functions is to extract energy from food within the cell. They have many other functions as well, but that's the one they're commonly known for. Now, almost all cells in the body have mitochondria, and there's somewhere between possibly 2,000 and 2 million mitochondria in each or almost all of those 37 trillion cells. So I'm just highlighting those numbers. You don't need to remember them, but I just want you to reflect for a minute how incredible you are and the incredible amount of activity going on in you at this very, very second. Now, whilst all of that activity is going on, your body has to maintain stability. And the biological term for that is homeostasis. So that's basically keeping everything in balance or stable as the world inside you and outside you changes. And some common areas of homeostasis we often talk about is temperature. So if the room you're in gets too hot, you might start taking some clothes off and perhaps sweating a bit to try and cool down, versus if the room got too cold, you might put more clothes on and start shivering to keep yourself warmer, to keep your body temperature at just the right level. So that's an example of homeostasis. And homeostasis is key to our survival. This is part of a definition from the Encyclopedia Britannica, that if homeostasis is successful, life continues. If unsuccessful, disaster or death will ensue. And the surfers in this picture are signifying this. So the surfer at the front there is managing to maintain stability or homeostasis, and they're having a great day, versus the surfer behind has not been able to maintain stability, and disaster or death is about to ensue. So this concept of homeostasis is really key. So just briefly to recap those last few slides, you're human, you're eating, living, sleeping, thinking, alive today. You're made of organs with 37 trillion cells with tons of chemical reactions going on inside you, loads and loads of mitochondria. All of that activity is going on. Your body's got to maintain stability, and if it doesn't, disaster or death will ensue. Now there's one area of homeostasis, stability, which is really key, and that is our blood sugar homeostasis, our blood sugar level. Now in all of the body there should be about 8 pints of blood in an average adult. It's about 8 pints or 5 litres of blood. And in all of that blood, the body only wants about 4 or 5 grams of glucose. So glucose is the sugar in blood. So 8 pints or 5 litres of blood, 4 or 5 grams, about 1 teaspoon of glucose. This is obviously a very small amount, but the body must keep that there. If it goes too low, let's say it dropped down to 1 gram, you're probably unconscious or on your way out. If it goes up above the teaspoon, the body's going to start working to bring it down because it could start doing damage. Certainly as it gets into the teens or 20s, you're going to start knowing about it. You'll start feeling very unwell. So keeping blood sugar at just the right level is really important. Now, how does sugar get into the blood? Well, there's only 2 places sugar can get into your blood, or where the blood in your sugar can come from. Sorry, the sugar in your blood can come from. The first is from food you eat. So if you ate glucose sugar or you eat starch, that food is digested and it gets absorbed from your gut into your blood as glucose sugar. So there's obviously glucose as sugar, but starch being effectively the plant's store of sugar. So foods such as potatoes, rice, pasta, floury products, etc. are basically starchy foods which, when eaten, digest down into glucose sugar. So eating those foods will raise your blood sugar. But the other way we can raise our blood sugar is with our liver. So the liver sits at the top right of the tummy. It's really a big chemical processing unit. And one of its roles is to store excess glucose sugar. So if you just ate, say, 2 or 3 slices of bread now, that would be digested down to glucose sugar in your gut, be absorbed into your blood, and your liver could take some of that glucose out and store it in the liver. And the liver can store up to about 100 grams of glucose in a form called glycogen. And then when you don't eat, the liver can break that back down and drip the glucose back into the blood, keeping your blood sugar at just the right level. Now the liver can also make glucose if it needs to. So it can turn fat or protein if it needs to into sugar. So in theory, you don't have to ever eat any glucose or any starch. Your liver could make everything you needed if it had to. And you could live to the ripe old age of 90 quite happily if you had to without ever eating a single molecule of glucose. Now, interestingly, in diabetes, when the blood sugar is raised, the liver is actually making too much sugar and releasing it into the blood. That's how good the liver is at making glucose. So just to summarize this slide, there are only 2 places where you can get glucose into your blood. That's from if you eat glucose or starch, or from your liver. Now, how do we lower blood glucose? So we need to make sure it doesn't go too low, but we also need to make sure it doesn't hang around too high. So one way of doing that is just by moving. If you just move your body, the muscles in your body will take some sugar out of the blood. But the other way is through using the hormone insulin. Now, insulin is a hormone. Hormones are messengers. They're released from one part of the body and they tell another part of the body what to do. So insulin is released from an organ near your stomach and your liver called your pancreas. And I'm going to describe to you very simply how insulin works. This is oversimplified, but for the purpose of this, it will make sense and help you apply this learning. So let's say you have something to eat for breakfast. You've had a bowl of cereal, bowl of cornflakes, something like that. They are mainly starch, and that starch will be broken down in your gut and turned to glucose. That glucose will then go into your blood, raising your blood sugar level. Now the body's then got to respond to this because it's got to keep blood sugar levels stable. It's got to maintain homeostasis. So the body responds to that by releasing insulin. And insulin, in very simple terms, gets released into the blood and in effect knocks on the doors of cells and says to those cells, please would you open your door? And if those cells are very happy to, they're in a good place, everything's working well inside, they'll open their door and the sugar in the blood can then go from the blood and into the cell, allowing the blood sugar level to drop. Once the blood sugar levels drop, the insulin level can also drop and the body goes back to being in a stable state, everyone's happy, life continues. Now there's a problem that happens for many people, and that is something called insulin resistance. And this is what's happening to a good 70% or more of the UK population and perhaps 92% or more of the US population. And what's happening here is the glucose is absorbed from that cornflakes, goes into the blood sugar level rises, the body notices this, releases some insulin. Insulin goes and knocks on the doors of the cells of the body and says to them, please would you open your door? And those cells, for whatever reason, say, not today, thank you. It might be because they've got enough fuel already or their mitochondria aren't working properly. So now we have a problem. The sugar level's gone up, the insulin level's gone up, the insulin's knocking on the doors of cells, but the doors aren't opening. Homeostasis is not being maintained now. Sugar levels are high. Disaster or death could ensue. The body's not going to let this happen if it can help it. So it responds to this by releasing more insulin and more insulin until instead of a polite knock on the door of these cells, there's a battering ram hammering at these cells, trying to force them to open. And eventually they do. And then the sugar can move out of the blood and into the cells. And then the sugar level can come down steadily, the insulin level can then steadily come back down. But as you can imagine, this is the body at war with itself. This is not harmony. This is not a community where everyone's happy with each other. This is survival of the fittest of the insides of your body, the body at war. And there are multiple knock-on effects of that. Some of those include insulin is actually a fuel storage hormone. It tells the body to store all sorts of fuel, not just sugar. And this includes fat. So as those insulin levels get pumped up really high, trying to force that sugar level down, the body is also being instructed to store fat, to make fat out of excess sugar, and not to release or burn fat. So this is why some people can hugely struggle to lose some fat from their belly, for example, because the high insulin levels keep them in fat storage mode. Insulin's also a bit of a growth hormone. So for example, cancer cells love sugar and they love insulin. So they have lots of insulin doorbells trying to get that signal from the insulin to absorb the sugar and grow and multiply. And insulin resistance, so the body fighting itself, also has multiple other knock-on effects, such as affecting the kidneys and blood vessels, driving high blood pressure. And in the brain, the insulin resistance probably prevents the brain cells getting enough energy and they stop functioning properly, which you can then start to link to why this might be linked to mental health disorders and also conditions such as Alzheimer's dementia. So it really is a major problem. And this person who we met at the beginning, really when I look at them now, what I'm seeing is the major problem is insulin resistance. They haven't got multiple different issues going on. They've got really a few issues, and a lot of their problems are sprouting out of being insulin resistant. So instead of adding a new tablet for them, I would now start talking to them about let's see if we can improve metabolic health, improve your insulin resistance. So insulin resistance is a core feature of poor metabolic health. Now you might be thinking now, how is my metabolic health? Am I insulin resistant? Well, I've created this fairly easy to follow chart to help you see where your insulin resistance might be. And these measures, they've been established for many decades, developed by a professor in the 1980s and 1990s called Gerald Reaven, who did a wonderful job of piecing together insulin resistance and how to identify it. And these are very, very simple measures. The easiest one to do for yourself is probably your waist circumference. So measuring your waist about 2 centimeters or an inch above your belly button and comparing that to your height. If your waist is more than half your height, then chances are you've got improvements that can be made to your metabolic health. In practice, having done hundreds of these assessments now, I tend to see a waist to height ratio, so your waist compared to your height, ideally somewhere between a sort of 0.44 and 0.47 seems to be optimal, but less than 0.5 is good. Also, your sugar level or glucose level, if done fasting, so that's when you haven't had anything to eat or drink yet other than water in the day for at least 8 hours prior. That should be less than 5.6. And again, you can see ambers and reds on there. If it's more than 7, then you're not known to have diabetes, it'd be worth getting checked. Triglycerides, so these are the fat in the blood. When you haven't just eaten any fat, the body should ideally be keeping the triglycerides in the blood low. If it can't, it's because either the liver's making too much fat and releasing it into the blood, or your fat stores are full and there's no room for that fat to get out of the blood. Importantly, when you're thinking of fat in the blood, what we often see with people with insulin resistance, it's not the fat that you've eaten that's causing the problem. It's often people have got more carbohydrate, so glucose going in than they can manage, and the body's trying to turn that into fat as quickly as possible. HDL cholesterol, that's often nicknamed good cholesterol, not the ideal name for it, but that's how people know it. The reason it's caused that is because it drops with insulin resistance. It gets worse with poor metabolic health. There's different cutoffs for males and females. So for males, it should ideally be more than 1.0, and for females, 1.3 or more. Different people do vary with what they will see. There is some genetic influence on this, obviously, but those are the rough figures to look for. And finally on this list, blood pressure. So raised blood pressure is a common feature of insulin resistance. So if your blood pressure is more than 130/85, or you're on blood pressure tablets, that is a marker of insulin resistance. Now, the best way to look at all of these measures is together. The human body is diverse. We are all different and diverse. Our bodies do different things with our lifestyle. What you really want to be looking for is more than one of these areas in the amber or red. If you've got 2 or definitely 3 of these areas in the amber or red, you are definitely showing signs of insulin resistance and could do likely with improving it. But hopefully that chart, which you can download in the link there, as you can see, will help you give yourself an assessment. And then when you do make changes, you can expect to see those numbers improving. Often within a couple of weeks is often seen. Sometimes days with some of these will change. This is not make a change and maybe in 20 years things might be a bit better. This is make the right changes and see rapid improvements. Now, just briefly, if ever I ask a room of people how you would make people metabolically sick, they always come up with the answers immediately. Feed them junk food, feed them too much sugar, stop them moving, stress them out, stop them sleeping properly, and create a world that just drives them to do the unhealthy things. We all want to be healthy, and we know what makes us unhealthy, so why do we do it? Well, this is just one example. It's obviously not the full picture, but it is one example. This is from an advert, I believe it was the 1980s on television, and these soldiers were lined up in the desert, and they all had a bowl of crunchy nut cornflakes. And the sergeant major was shouting at them, "Resist, you must resist." And the 2 you can see here buried in the sand couldn't resist and started eating the crunchy nut cornflakes. And as a result, they got buried in the sand up to the neck, and then the rest of them went and enjoyed the crunchy nut cornflakes. But the catchphrase of the advert, as it says here, is, "The trouble is they taste too good." So what we're being told here is when you eat these, you might come to harm, but you're not going to be able to resist them because they taste so good. And I think this is a problem for a lot of people now. I don't want to label any of these foods as actually good or bad, but from a point of view of metabolic health, that we are now surrounded by foods that are really created to make them hugely desirable to us. And even if we know we're going to come to harm by eating them, we still struggle to resist them. And this is one of the reasons why so many of us are now showing signs of poor metabolic health. But perhaps more positively now, let's talk about how we can improve our metabolic health, and often very rapidly. Before we do that, to start with, I'd just like to share this one rule. This is my one rule. I think I've done about 140,000 patient consultations so far. And if there's one thing I've learned from people and myself, it's that we are awful at criticizing ourselves, as good or bad. And as far as metabolic health goes, as soon as we're feeling bad about ourselves, we're going to be needing something to pick ourselves up. And often those are solutions that don't do us any long-term favors. So what's really key is we remove self-criticism about behaviors towards ourselves. So this rule is, what I do is not good or bad, therefore I am not good or bad. What I do can be helpful or unhelpful, and helpful moves me towards what matters. So we'll remove the good-bad thinking, because that takes us to an unhelpful place. But we can't fool science, so we do need to think, is what I'm doing helpful or unhelpful? And helpful moves me towards what matters is quite a personal thing. So you need to know what matters, you need to know what you're trying to achieve, but also your body's different to somebody else's, what else is going on in your life is different to somebody else's, but you know if what you're doing works because it's actually helping you achieve what you want to. For example, if somebody wants to reverse their type 2 diabetes, reduce their medication and lose some belly fat rapidly within the next few months, there are certain actions they're going to have to take. Whereas if somebody else is hugely stressed out and they are struggling with sleep as their number one priority, and they're going through a life trauma, then maybe the most important thing for that moment in time is to connect with somebody that they care about and cares about them. So when we're thinking about this, we're applying it just to ourselves, and we're not comparing each other. And we are not going down the line of good, bad thinking, but we are thinking, is this behavior going to be helpful or unhelpful? And this is especially important with nutrition, which is a very emotive topic for many people. I'm now going to talk you through the health foundations, so as I call them. These are the 5 areas which we need to think about when we're working out how to improve our metabolic health. And I'm just going to talk you through the real headline acts for each one of these. So first of all, nutrition. I think if there was one message with nutrition, it would be eat real food. Something like 60% of the food that adults eat in the UK is ultra processed, so sort of food-like substances. I believe 80% of the food that infants eat is ultra processed. So by default, we're not eating what we now kind of nickname, sadly, real food. We shouldn't have to call it that, but because there's so much ultra processed food around, we have to distinguish it somehow. Real food is food our great-great-grandparents would have eaten. It's food that typically doesn't have an ingredients list, because broccoli, cabbage, chicken, eggs, etc. are what they are. They don't have ingredients. I once heard a rule of thumb that if it comes in a packet and has more than 4 or 5 ingredients, it's probably not real food. So as a general rule of thumb, follow that principle most of the time. Next, I like to think about where you're getting your protein from. There's a minimum amount of protein the body needs a day to survive, and there's an ideal amount, which is about 1 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of your ideal body weight. So if somebody's ideal body weight's about 70 kilograms, then they should be eating between about 70 grams and 140 grams of protein a day. Now, many people don't like tracking things down to that sort of level. So as a rough rule of thumb, I tend to say if you were going to eat out in a pub or a restaurant or a cafe, whatever the protein food on the plate, so that typically is some sort of meat or poultry or pulses, etc., you want to roughly double what you would get, because these foods typically are a bit more expensive, so you get lesser than when you're eating out. But with every meal, you should be looking at your plate or your dish and thinking, where's the protein in this meal? Next, we've got personalised carbohydrate, and I truly do mean that. We're all different. Our bodies are different. We're trying to achieve different things. What's right for one person might not be right for the next. However, our dietary approach for the last few decades, which fortunately now we're rapidly changing, but our dietary approach has been encouraging people to eat around about 250 to 300 grams of carbohydrate or glucose per day. And now that so many people are insulin resistant, pushing 250 to 300 grams of glucose in a day is too much for many, many people. So for many people, they need to reduce the amount of carbohydrate coming in. And also ideally it needs to be from whole real food, not refined, sugary, ultra-processed carbohydrates. Next on here we've got personalised fat. So we are no longer in the 1980s demonising fat, but you need to think about what you're trying to achieve. My rough rule of thumb is if the fat comes with the whole food, then you can typically enjoy it. But if you're adding lots of extra fats, then just stop and think about what you're trying to achieve. And I've learned this from patients that sometimes they heard that fat's not bad for us like we once thought, and they've ended up eating lots of fat. And it may have also been on social media forums and hearing people saying fat's free, you can eat as much as you want. And actually, that's not necessarily true depending on what your goals are. If you've got lots of body fat to burn, maybe the key is to burn that off before you start eating lots. And as a general principle, I tend to say focus on eating real, natural fats that, again, we could have accessed over hundreds of thousands of years, not fats that have been down a production line, which may change them into something that's not quite appropriate for the human body. Fifth on here, we've got timing. So this is really starting to think about moving away from this idea that the 3 meals a day and 3 or 4 snacks is what we should be doing, towards let's stop eating all the time and let the body unpack some of this excess fuel, which often is a big part of insulin resistance. So this might just be moving back to having 3 meals a day and not the 3 snacks. But there's also something that's become more popular now called time-restricted eating, and that's where people eat all their food in a shorter eating window. 16/8 is very popular. Basically means eat all your food in an 8-hour window, and in the 16 remaining hours you don't eat any calorie-containing food or drinks. So for many people, they find it very easy to skip breakfast, have some food around about 11 a.m, and then they have their last food of the day at 7 p.m. And then after that, water, teas, coffees, splash of milk is probably okay, and fruit teas and things. After time-restricted eating, some people do something called intermittent fasting, which for some people seems to be extremely powerful, and that maybe they just eat once a day, and some people go on to do something called extended fast, which is eating even more infrequently. Certainly not everybody needs to do this. Some people enjoy it, some people don't, but it's an option in there. And finally, on there, adequate water. Now, there is no real science behind how much we should drink exactly, certainly for everyday life, but being dehydrated probably drives insulin resistance. So if you're busy and distracted and you find you're peeing orange juice, then just be a bit more conscious and make sure you're drinking enough. Just to look at this personalised carbohydrate a bit more, this breakfast on the left is a mushroom and tomato omelette. That has about 2 grams of glucose in it, about half a teaspoon, whereas the breakfast on the right is some porridge with banana, and that has about 60 grams or 12 teaspoons of glucose in it. Now, I don't want you to think of either of these options as good or bad, but I do want you to consider, is it helpful or unhelpful, depending on what you're trying to achieve. Now, somebody with type 2 diabetes who's struggling to keep their blood sugar down and ending up on increasing numbers of drugs and gaining weight and high blood pressure, that person, if they want to rapidly improve their health, perhaps reduce the medication, lose some body fat and feel a whole lot better, then actually the breakfast on the right, the porridge and banana, is not helpful to them. It is driving up their blood sugar, driving up their insulin, worsening the insulin resistance. So for them, it might be the breakfast on the left is a better option. But this, again, as I mentioned before, depends on you, depends on what you're trying to achieve. This is something I think is very important to share, and I've seen many patients over the years who have really struggled with something called reactive hypoglycemia. So they were often feeling anxious and shaky and couldn't concentrate, and then they would eat something and feel a bit better. And this was going on day in, day out, and all through the day. And what's happening here is that when this is a blood sugar level, somebody has something sugary and it causes their blood sugar to shoot up. And then not long after, you get this rapid drop in blood sugar. And this is as the insulin's being released and hammering at the doors of the cells and get those cells to open the door, the sugar then suddenly exits. Now, what I didn't mention earlier on actually is insulin also stops the liver releasing sugar. So the sugar's shot up, the insulin's shot up, the sugar's being pushed down, but the liver is also being prevented from releasing any more sugar. So that rapid drop and then a possible low creates basically a fight-flight response in the body. The body's about to go into a bit of an energy crisis. And the result of that is adrenaline being pumped out and the nervous system firing up into fight or flight mode, causing these symptoms of feeling hungry and shaky and people can't concentrate. They're then going to have a biscuit or a banana if they're feeling healthy, and they suddenly feel better for the next hour or two, and then they crash again. And I think there's lots of people experiencing this with breakfast cereal. 11 o'clock, they're feeling starving, can't concentrate, have a banana or biscuit. Midday comes or lunchtime comes and they're feeling starving again, they have their sandwich, and this just day in, day out roller coaster. So the key with this is really don't eat the food that rockets the blood sugar up in the first place, and problem solved. It's very simple to very simple to fix. Now that's nutrition in a nutshell, and there's obviously lots more to talk about that, but hopefully that gives you some headline acts. Now we have movement. So movement, I don't like to think about moving. It's all about is about calories. Movement's very good for us. We shouldn't be just attaching it to calorie burn, which is what too many of us have thought about it for a long time. But movement is good. Getting the body moving, getting the muscles moving and building, and heart and lungs pumping is good. The take-home phrase for this I like is move because it makes today better. Move because it clears your head. You like to go for a walk. It makes you feel better out in nature. You've got to walk the dog. You like doing gardening. You like running, dancing, swimming, rowing, cycling, whatever it is. Do it for that reason. It'll make you feel better. And then you'll keep doing it every day. How much movement should we do? Well, we should probably move for 1 to 2 minutes every hour or so. Just move your body in some way. Move your arms, move your legs, get up, have a potter around. We should do some resistance activity at least twice a week, perhaps even every day. And this is basically activity that challenges your big muscles, so your thigh muscles, buttocks, arms, to really work them and get them working harder than everyday life does. For many people now, they're typically hardly doing any resistance activity. And the problem with this is big muscles that get worked are very good for soaking up excess sugar and improving insulin resistance. Now, you don't need to do much. If you like going to the gym 5 times a week, by all means keep doing that. But if you don't have much time in your day, or you're not the sort of person to go to the gym, even just 1 or 2 minutes whilst you're putting the kettle on for your morning drink is better than nothing. Next, we've got aerobic activity. So this is also known as cardiovascular, or CV. This is just stuff that gets your heart and lungs moving. It doesn't need to be about sweatbands or making yourself vomit with exercise. It can just be going for a walk, a brisk walk, or heavy gardening or housework. And probably about 20 minutes a day is an adequate amount. But with this, really think about doing it because it's giving you some benefit, and you're far more likely to keep doing that. Now, the 2 resistance exercises I often speak to my patients about are these 2. So the top one there showing some form of press up. So it could be shown against a wall or onto a kitchen countertop or on the floor. The idea is you're really just wanting to challenge those muscles to the point of fatigue. So you might think about doing maybe up to 20 of these press ups. And as you get to number 20, your arms are starting to scream at you, I don't really want to do another one. So whether you need to do those against a wall, or actually they're getting too easy, you move your feet further back from the wall, or you do them on the kitchen counter, or you do them on the floor, or you're really tough and you can do them one-armed. Whatever it is, do them to a point of fatigue. And again, if they're too easy, you can, instead of just moving your feet, you can do them more slowly. That will fatigue the muscles as well. At the bottom there's a squat, so that's going to help the buttocks and the thigh muscles to work and build. Some people will find these very easy to do. Other people will struggle, and that's okay. Just hold on to the back of a chair and just go as low as you feel comfortable and just hold it for a moment, then back up. Perhaps do 5 and then have a break and do another 5 and get a total up to 20 again. Or if you find these easy, slow them down or do them one-legged, or hold 2 kettlebells and do them one-legged. Again, whatever it is to get to that point of fatigue by the time you get to a maximum of 20. And I think if you do these every day, they're only going to take 1 or 2 minutes. Put it into your morning habit routine with putting the kettle on, and that's a good minimum dose. It's going to make a difference if you usually don't do anything. Next, sleep. Average adults should be getting between about 7 and 9 hours sleep a night, ideally. However, there are plenty of people that don't get that and not through choice. So we're not going to worry about poor sleep, but we are going to prioritize it. So where is your opportunity to try to get 7 hours sleep? This means trying not to sit on the phone at 1 o'clock in the morning and then setting your alarm for 6 in the morning, for example. It's giving yourself that space to sleep if you're able to. Now, this can be tricky for people. There's lots of other things going on in life, shift work, children, dependents, etc. So don't view this as a deal breaker, but where you can, try and get that amount. Try and get 7 hours if possible. But also think about the quality of sleep. So when you're asleep, is it good quality, refreshing sleep? Now this graph is showing points over a series of nights of how relaxed the body is. The higher the point is, the more relaxed the body is. So this person is actually me, and it's fairly good refreshing sleep most nights. And then you can see a dip there. That was a Saturday night. And on this Saturday night, I'd had about half a bottle of Prosecco to drink and a couple of pints of beer over about 6 hours. And as you can see there was a real dip, and that dip basically means whilst I was asleep that night, my body was in real fight or flight mode. It was really stressed out. So I was asleep, but I was very stressed out. That is not a refreshing sleep. And can you imagine what would happen if that was done 3, 4, 5 times a week? Most of the time the body would be in fight or flight mode. If it's like that every night, the next day is not the next day the body's going to be more insulin resistant, plus you'll be craving the food to give you a quick hit. Other things you can do to improve your quality of sleep is, where possible, dark rooms, keeping screens out of the room, etc. And just look to ways you can optimize that. Don't worry about perfection, but just look to see what you can do. Fourth, we've got mindset. So mindset for me really encompasses optimizing stress and creating habits. With optimizing stress and creating habits, I think a focus on knowing what matters most to you seems to help. Knowing what matters helps you to not focus on things you worry about but shouldn't be focusing on. It also helps you when you're making decisions. For example, those crunchy nut cornflakes, they might be hugely desirable, but if you're trying to think, well, I want to be around for my kids, or I want to be able to walk my dog, or I want to get fit in the next month, if that's a good emotive reason, you will find you should be able to fight the urge to eat the sugary, crunchy food. These 4 areas I've listed here: connect, influence, notice, growth. I think they're reasonable 4 areas to focus on to help optimize your mindset. So connect, most humans seem to do well with some sort of supportive human connection. Social isolation doesn't do us very well typically, and also spending time with people that are unhelpful for our mindset or well-being can drive a lot of stress. So where possible, try and seek out people that are going to share your values and purpose. For some of us, we're lucky, and we may have family or friends immediately around us that do that. Others of us may be less lucky, and family, friends, neighbours, colleagues may be having a negative impact on our mindset. So we may need to try and work out how we can limit that to some degree and seek out other people, which we might be able to do through a hobby, for example, or joining a group. Next here, influence. So the brain needs a perception of control. If it feels like it hasn't got control, it will fire off the fight or flight response. So we need to keep our attention focused on things that are under our control, and that helps to reduce the fight or flight response in our brain. And with metabolic health, focusing on what we can influence also helps us focusing on things we can change, not getting frustrated and upset of things we can't change because of the world we're in. So keep a focus on what's under your influence. Third on here, notice. So this is really about helping to create habits. You weren't going to drink alcohol and you're going to do your 20 squats today. You've noticed you've done that, and you're going to be actively pleased with yourself that you've done it, and tick that off in your brain. That will just help create habits and keep the change happening. And finally on here, growth. Carol Dweck, a researcher, has named something called the growth mindset, And this is really all about how we're not fixed in who we are. We're not set and can never change. Especially to do with metabolic health, we can always improve. No matter what happened this morning, yesterday, who our relatives are, etc., we can always improve our metabolic health. And this is called a growth mindset. We know that we can grow and change over time, which is really important. Finally on here, and this really doesn't do it justice, but environment is key. But we do live in a world that quite often may be trying to drive us in the wrong direction, and we may or may not be able to change some of those features. So we just need to simply focus on the environment that we can influence to a degree. Whether that's changing the foods that are in our home, whether it's changing the route home that we take to avoid going into a garage shop, whether it's about contacting a friend to go for a walk tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning, putting the trainers by the front door to make it all easier. Whatever it is, try and adapt your environment to best suit you. As a famous Olympian once said to me, Jaffa cakes in the supermarket I only have to avoid once. When they're in the home, I have to avoid them every minute of every day. So how can you adjust your home environment or work environment or wherever you are to help you on your journey? Now, we've heard all of those ideas. Now we need to put them together. So the 3 A's of success, or for success, is what I've come up with. So your first A is aspiration. What direction do you want to go in? What's your big goal? Why does it matter to you? This is your big lighthouse in the distance you're trying to travel towards, but it may be a bit too far into the future or far away to feel like you can reach to fully motivate you. So you need some smaller achievements or checkpoints, and I typically find a 7 to 28 day focus works well for people, in that if they just narrow the focus down, what am I going to do for the next 7 days or 28 days, and keep their attention on that. That seems to be motivating. I used to do 3 months with people, but I found out that it seems to be too long for many people. So these short achievements, short checkpoints. And finally, the third A, actions. You need some specific actions you're going to take every day that are going to get you the goals that you want. And these need to be really specific, that when you do them or if somebody is watching you, they could see that you've done them and tick them off. So with that in mind, I'd now like to share the 28-day rapid results plan. And this was created a couple of years ago when patients kept asking me, could I just tell them what to do? Up until that point, I'd really avoided it. I thought everybody's different. Everyone's got different lives. They've got different things going on. They've got different preferences. How do I know what you should exactly be doing? But the flip side was patients are busy. They haven't got a lifetime to spend on focusing on metabolic health and understanding it all to know what will work, and were wanting me to tell them. So I gave in and I created what I think is a kind of all-encompassing plan that is suitable for most people. It's a plan, not the plan, and it may or may not be suitable for everyone for the long term. But as a 28-day kind of kickstart, it's extremely likely to get results for people. I've known hundreds of people do this now, and the results are fantastic. If people have got weight to lose, they'll lose between half a stone and a stone, so 3 to 6 kilos. They might lose 5 to 15 centimeters off their waist. Within days, they're often saying they're feeling so much better. I will highlight again, like I did at the beginning, though, if you're on anything like diabetes medications or high blood pressure medications, you must speak to a healthcare professional before you make these changes, because the drugs may need to be adjusted, otherwise you could come to harm. I'm just going to list the 10 things down the side here to do every day. So the first is a real food, high protein dietary focus. Then 16-8, which I'll explain in a minute. 2 litres of water. There is no science behind that, but we're just trying not to be dehydrated. For some people, we might want to turn that into 1.5 litres if they're peeing all day. 0 alcohol. Some people aren't overly keen on that. I say that's fine. You don't have to do this exact plan. But actually, if you want to be guaranteed results, then I suggest 0 alcohol for 28-day. A focus of that will be helpful. 20 press-ups, like I mentioned earlier. 20 squats, like I mentioned. 20 minutes of CV, that's the aerobic or cardiovascular. Walk, run, cycle, housework, gardening, whatever you enjoy doing. Magnesium, which we will talk through in a moment. 7-hour sleep allowance, even if you don't sleep. Where's the opportunity? And notice. So you want to notice one thing you've done today that you're pleased with. It might be did my 20 press-ups. and tick it off. So that's 10 things to tick every day for 28 days, and you can give yourself a score at the end of each day of how many things you ticked off. And I think my promise I give to my patients, if they follow this and they've got room for improvement, they will see benefits. At the end of 28 days, everybody's an adult, they can choose what they want to do. My hope is people have started to establish new habits and a new baseline and found out what works for them and can continue. Some people do, some people drift back again and then pick it up again a few months later. But my real goal is to get rapid results with people and then long-term gains and sustained benefits too. The real food high protein dietary focus I mentioned, this is in the download on the Health Shelf website. You can look at it, but just very briefly, there are 2 sheets of paper. The first sheet, all the foods are higher in protein and or fat. And the second sheet, all the foods are low in protein and fat. So back to the first sheet on the left there, all of these foods are higher in protein and or fat. They're then divided by their carbohydrate content, so very low carbohydrate, or moderate carbohydrate. And then within each of those categories, they're divided between high protein, low fat, through to no protein, high fat. And the basic take-home message with this sheet, no matter what your other dietary preference is, whether you're an omnivore, pescatarian, vegetarian, vegan, carnivore, whatever your other preferences are, what you want to be doing from this is eating lots of the food in green. That'll get you tons of protein in and it'll fill you up. Then, depending on what your goals are, you don't want to necessarily be absolutely hugely overdoing the fat. So in that top section there, in the middle section, the amber and reds, the fat's starting to increase and the protein's starting to drop. That doesn't mean you can't eat them. It just perhaps means that they're not your, when you look at your plate, that's not your meal. What I will say here, if you're at your kind of ideal body weight and you don't want to lose any more body fat, then you can obviously increase your fat intake some more. But whilst you're wanting to burn body fat, you don't want to be overdoing those foods. At the bottom of the sheet 1, you'll see dairy and dairy alternatives. I couldn't colour code these because they're so diverse. As a rough rule of thumb, what I say to my patients is have a bit, just don't make it your meal. It's fine to do. Put some milk in your tea or coffee, whatever that milk is fine. But probably typically you find if people are drinking pints of milk, they may not be reversing insulin resistance and seeing them achieve the goals they wish to. The sheet 2, so all of these foods on sheet 2 are low in protein and fat, so they're just divided by their carbohydrate content. As a rough rule of thumb, anything in green on that sheet you can eat all you want, really can. If you want to eat 3 cabbages, go for it, if you can stomach it. As you start to get to the amber, the sugars or starches are starting to increase. They're not a no-no, but you don't want to be overdoing them. And then as you get to the red, these foods are getting pretty high in sugars or starches. And depending on how you're wired, you can decide what you want to do with these. Some people are all-in people. If they have one, they'll have lots, so they just cut them all out completely for the 28 days. Other people, if they think they can't eat a slice of bread, the first thing they're going to go and do is buy a loaf of bread and eat it all. So do what works for you there. What I typically say with my patients is give it a go, see what happens. If you're not getting results, then go north on the pieces of paper, i.e. head more towards the green. If you're doing well and want a bit more flexibility and you're achieving your goals and you want to drift further south a bit, see what happens, go for it. It's finding a way to personalize it and make it work for you in an enjoyable way. The 16-8 I mentioned, this is called time-restricted eating. And this is an example here I've shown in the diagram. So a 24-hour period, midnight to midnight. Time-restricted eating refers to reducing the time in which you're eating or restricting the time in which you're eating to a shorter period. So this is showing somebody who's eating between 11 a.m. and 7 p.m. So they're skipping breakfast. They might have some water or tea or coffee, and a splash of milk's fine, but they're not eating anything substantial until 11 a.m. and then they're having their final food for the day at 7 p.m. and then not eating again after that. And in theory, what this is doing is giving a longer period of time, so 16 hours with no incoming food, so the body can start just burning some of the stored fuel and unpacking. The insulin levels can come down and allow the body's fat stores to be released. Interestingly, in practice, I've also found this helps stop people habitually eating biscuits and things whilst watching television in the evening. Many people might sit down at 8 o'clock to watch the television and just by habit start nibbling biscuits. And this rule that they're saying to themselves, I'm not going to eat after 7 p.m, just prevents them from doing that and starts helping change those habits. So this is in the 28-day rapid results plan. I put it in there to absolutely guarantee results. Some people love this, some people it doesn't suit them. Do what works for you, and make it an enjoyable, sustainable approach, whatever you do. Now, magnesium, I mentioned, is in the 28-day rapid results plan. Obviously, it was one of the 10, which means I must think it's important to get it in there. And the reason I definitely put it in there is because many people are thought to be deficient in magnesium now. I believe something like 50% of the population are mildly deficient in magnesium, and about 75% of people with type 2 diabetes. If you had a blood test, certainly in standard healthcare, then it probably wouldn't show up because most of the magnesium is in the rest of your body, not in your blood. But the reason that this got to be one of the 10 in the 28-day plan is because when some people change their diet when they've got insulin resistance, it takes a bit of time for the body to adapt. And one of the consequences of that delay is muscle cramps or constipation. And the magnesium supplementation seems to be remarkably good at dealing with muscle cramps and constipation. So that's how it definitely got onto the top 10 list. But equally, mitochondria are also quite important for a huge number of chemical reactions in our body, and including an integral part of energy extraction in mitochondria. So if we are mildly deficient, then there's probably no harm in boosting those levels up. Now, we don't need to overdo magnesium, but one of the problems is apparently a lot of our food is deficient in magnesium through the production processes now. So taking a magnesium supplement seems to be an easy solution to this. And generally what I say to my patients is buy a supplement you trust, and I often suggest either magnesium citrate or magnesium bisglycinate, and just take the dose it suggests on the container. And this gives you roughly sort of 50% of what's called your recommended daily allowance. So chances are you aren't going to overdo it if you do it that way. So what happens when people follow this sort of approach, whether it's that 28-day rapid results plan or they've honed a plan that suits them personally? Well, this is the person we met at the beginning. I now feel the best I have in years. I've got more energy and I'm back in the genes I wore 20 years ago. And look, they're still 52 years old, and they've still got the osteoarthritis. On the x-ray it wouldn't have changed, but for many people the symptoms improve, whether that's through a combination of less inflammation in the body, possibly losing a bit of weight and reducing the pressure on the joint. But they're off their acid reflux tablet, which we see with a lot of people actually when they cut out the refined carbohydrates. That acid reflux seems to get better. Many people, blood pressure improves. About 50% of my patients improves massively, 25% a bit, and there is some people that it doesn't seem to budge because there must be other reasons going on. Pre-diabetes just fixes because we're fixing the insulin resistance, which is what pre-diabetes is. Depression often improves. People very rapidly say they feel better, probably directly through improving metabolic health, but also this person's back in charge of their life. And the weight, so we've learned that weight loss isn't the focus of calorie burn that we've had for so many years is not helpful for so many people. Trying to eat less and move more just does not work. I've had so many patients come in and see me as I eat healthy, I don't eat very much, and they really don't. And they're going to the gym and they're just not losing weight. And it's because their body's locked in fat storage mode through what they're eating and what that does to their hormones. So if we change this and take this metabolic health approach and with what we're eating and how we're moving, we alter how the hormones are working in our body, and especially insulin, the body can then go into fat release and fat burning mode, and people's weight improves. I often like to call it weight correction. So the weight goes to the ideal weight and then it holds itself there. And then this person, they're no longer tired all the time because the engine for life is now running well, and they feel better and have more energy. So really, this is all about a choice. It's about, for me, my keenness is empower people with some knowledge and they can choose what they want to do. And if they want to choose to improve their metabolic health, they've got the tools and know-how to do this and make it work for them. And what's key over the long run, which I alluded to before, people often say, well, I'm really going to go for this 28 days. What do I do after that? Well, everybody's different. I've had some patients do many loops of the 28 days and they've lost sort of 8 stone over 8 months, and they obviously had it to lose. Other people go all in for 28 days and then they want what they feel is a more sustainable long-term plan. And I've tried to signify what I think many of us need to do. So what we need to try and do is make our baseline behaviours metabolically healthy. So that diagram on the left there is showing poorer long-term health and well-being. Their baseline in the red there is the more metabolically unhealthy actions, is what they're normally doing. And occasionally they're doing metabolically healthy actions. And actually this person will never get particularly good metabolic health with that approach, even if they get inspired every now and then. Whereas on the right, we've got somebody who's got a more metabolically healthy baseline. Most of the time they're doing metabolically healthy things, but occasionally it's okay. It's a birthday, they have a piece of cake. That's fine. Do what works for them, as long as that baseline stays metabolically healthy most of the time. Do what works for you. So I hope that was helpful. All this information can be found on the website healthshelf.org, including this Metabolic Health 28-day plan. This is a completely free website. It's non-commercial. I created it for my NHS patients, and it's just a useful resource. But I'll just reiterate at the end, if you do want to action any of this, good luck and enjoy it, and I hope you see many benefits. But please do speak to your healthcare professional if you've got any doubts about any of your health conditions or any of your medications.